Dr. Polis keeps contending that we've been working at the hard problem of consciousness and continually failing for over 400 years. No, most of the attention has been geared towards the easy problems. We haven't really been working that hard on the hard problems. The little work we've done since the invention of the MRI has yielded promising results, though what Dr. Polis has done and is continuing to do here is argue from ignorance. Since we don't have the most difficult problem of the mind completely figured out yet, that means he can submit an untestable theory that he can tailor to explain the gaps in our knowledge, even though he has to twist some facts around to do it. There is no evidence for the two-subsystem mind theory, because there can't be any evidence for it. Whatever this second subsystem is, Polis has made it clear it isn't physical, and therefore isn't testable. The only way it can be falsified is if we can entirely explain consciousness from a physical standpoint. As I've stated in the past, we can do this with any mystery we have. We can decide that since we don't have gravity fully explained, we can therefore attribute the gaps in our knowledge to actions made by the flying spaghetti monster. It perfectly explains the missing knowledge of gravity. Of course, we have no reason to actually believe this is the case, just like Polis's theory. Except, of course, for the whole self-contradictory part, but I'll get to that later. Dr. Polis then discusses this quote he put up from Dr. Chalmers' book. I believe he was quote mining it. He has argued that Dr. Chalmers claims we've made no progress on the hard problem of consciousness. And now he's arguing that he skipped over the part about there being good evidence that consciousness arises from physical systems because it is irrelevant to the no progress claim. This is incorrect. It is very relevant to the fact of there being evidence for physicalism. It just doesn't mention explaining how physicalism works. If I have good reason to believe that a black eye was caused by a baseball, but I don't have an explanation of how the black eye could have caused the black eye, that doesn't remove the fact that we have reason to believe the baseball caused it. Dr. Polis doesn't go over this evidence, to my knowledge, so I still consider it quote mining. Dr. Polis goes on by attempting to refute my analogy of appealing to the flying spaghetti monster and intelligent falling in relation to explaining gravity by saying we have good evidence for gravity. Right, but there are aspects of gravity we don't understand. We don't have a detailed theory of quantum gravity, for example.
So isn't it better to have a provisional model which accounts for all of the data than a model that accounts for half the data and an unfulfilled promise to account for the other half of the data at some time unspecified?
My analogy still holds. Dr. Polis again tries to say I have no evidence for my belief in physical brains causing consciousness. Yet we do see a correlation between what happens to the brain and awareness. Taking drugs can alter your conscious awareness, not just the data coming in. There is a difference between brains that are aware of data and brains just processing the data without awareness. Dr. Polis, though, has no evidence for his claims. He only argues from ignorance that we don't know everything about consciousness. Therefore, again, he can insert his untestable theory. Dr. Polis then tries to argue that the hard problem of consciousness has been around for centuries, not merely a decade or two. I believe my point still stands that the majority of work has not been trying to solve the hard problem. Again, we've only recently had the tools to uncover the how. We have good reason to say we know the that, however, something Polis continually ignores. He then goes into how he hasn't seen a model of consciousness yet, even in recent years. Unfortunately for him, we are not talking about entire models of consciousness. We're talking about progress towards showing that awareness is a product of physical systems. We have made progress on that point, and Polis is ignoring it and is guilty of the fallacy of moving the goalposts. Polis then points out that I started saying I couldn't find a quote by Chalmers, then I claimed that in fact I never looked in the first place. He bases this off me saying I didn't have access to Chalmers' book, but ignores the fact that Chalmers has many different pieces of work, and just because I didn't review his book doesn't mean I didn't look through many peer-reviewed papers he has published in journals. In fact, I did. Polis then contends that he gave evidence for his two-subsystem mind. His evidence is to say Daniel Dennett has shown no naturalist model can explain consciousness. How Dennett has done this is not fully explained, and without reading Dennett's entire book, I can't really respond to that. Suffice to say, not all naturalists agree with Dennett, and from what I can gather, neither do I. The other evidence that he gives is that you need two systems to have a theory of mind, one to process content and one to be aware of the content. So, therefore, the other system is an intentional, non-physical system. Leap in logic. That's conjecture at best. Now comes the beginning of my favorite part. He calls into question what I deem a major and minor point. For the record, I consider a major point something that undermines his entire theory, and a minor point something that casts doubt on but does not disprove the argument. This was in relation to his argument for free will. Let's see what I said about it. In my video, I pointed out that Dr. Polis believes free will is derived from our intentionality, being able to warp the laws of nature, thus affecting the neurons in our brain. He cites a meta-analysis or two that tries to show that random number generators and dice throws can be affected by thoughts. I'm paraphrasing. But now, I said that I hoped these studies were true, because if they were, it would utterly destroy free will, not to mention his entire theory. If I can use my intentionality to control the neurons in my brain, we can do that to anyone else. I pointed out that he contradicted himself in the comment section by saying affecting isn't controlling, even though the basis for his entire point is that we can control our actions by affecting 1 out of every 10,000 neurons. Dr. Polis claimed he didn't have time to address that point in his first response. He instead went into why meta-analysis is so great. So I said, fine, I'll give you meta-analysis, but respond to the point which undermines your entire theory. Despite that, again, he explains why meta-analysis is so great, but does eventually explain why he initially didn't respond to it.
I didn't deal with this argument because it's so weak that I didn't want to embarrass him further. But since HonestDiscussioner insists upon being embarrassed, let me go ahead. He doesn't understand what a system is. A television, for example, is a system. All of the parts are integrated. However, if you put another device near it, which can receive radio waves, it will receive waves generated by the television set. If you put another television set next to it, if it's not properly shielded, it might even get some signals from the first set. That does not mean that the picture on the second set is going to be controlled by the picture on the first set. Systems have a certain degree of integration. The intentional part of my humanity controls the physical part of my humanity, and it may have the side effect of affecting, but not controlling, objects around me. And, in fact, the meta-analyses which I cited showed that we do have the ability to affect, in a minor way, other physical systems. That does not mean that we control them. When we affect a random number generator, for example, its basic physics continues intact.
Well, for the last time, I'm going to bring in my special guest refuter. Take it away.
The mind can exert intentional control over the laws of nature, with the effect being about 1 part in 10,000. 1 part in 10,000 doesn't seem like a very large effect. However, the brain contains 10 to the 11th neurons. Thus, an effect of 1 part in 10,000 corresponds to controlling 10 million neurons. Given that the brain has evolved as a control system, and that the nature of control systems is to use small inputs to control large outputs, this is more than adequate to control our body and behavior.
Yep, according to you, Dr. Polis, a small amount of interference is what controls the brain. Dr. Polis is engaging in special pleading. He argues your intentionality can control your physical system, but it can only affect other systems. And he gives no basis for this distinction. He also believes, according to the comment section, that we can affect people's thoughts and get them to take actions they would not have taken had you not affected them. I've pointed this out to you already several times, Dr. Polis, and now you've had 2 chances to counter my argument, and you haven't. Dr. Polis, you are still caught in a contradiction, and your entire theory and theology is undermined. Even if every other point I make against you is flatly wrong, this alone is enough to debunk the two-subsystem mind.